The word divorce hung in the air between us, not as a question but as a cold, hard statement. My husband, Mark, had just walked through the door after work, his tie slightly loosened, and delivered the verdict without preamble. In my previous life, that single word had shattered me. I remembered the feeling all too well, the floor dropping away, the frantic, desperate questions bubbling up. What did I do wrong? Is there someone else? What about our son, Leo? He's going to be a senior next year. I had been Amelia then, a devoted wife and mother who defined her entire existence by the approval of her family. I had cried, I had begged, I had sworn to be better, whatever that meant. But that was a different Amelia. That Amelia was dead. She had died a decade from now, pushed from a high-rise rooftop by the very son she had sacrificed everything for. When I opened my eyes this morning, the familiar hum of the air conditioner, the scent of the lemon-scented polish I used on the furniture, the weight of my 35-year-old body, it was all a brutal, beautiful shock. I was back. Back to the moment 10 years ago when Mark first asked for a divorce. The memories of my other life flooded me, a toxic, clarifying poison. I saw it all with perfect, painful clarity. Mark's sudden change of heart the day after asking for the divorce, all because his mother, Eleanor, had a stroke and was left paralyzed. He didn't want me back. He wanted a free, round-the-clock nurse. For 10 years I played the part. I bathed Eleanor, fed her, turned her to prevent bed sores, and swallowed every ounce of her ingratitude. I gave up my career as a promising graphic designer to become a full-time caretaker and tutor for Leo, who had started slipping in school. I lived on the periphery of my own life, my world shrinking to the walls of this house and the demands of two people who secretly despised me. The day Eleanor finally died, Mark served me with divorce papers. He and Leo, my beautiful boy, had conspired against me. They used my love for Leo to trick me into signing away my rights to everything, leaving me with nothing but the clothes on my back. And then, as a final glorious insult, Mark publicly and proudly married his college sweetheart Clara, a woman he had been cheating with for years. Driven by a grief I could no longer contain, I went to their new penthouse to demand an explanation, to force them to look me in the eye. It was Leo who opened the door. Leo, whose university tuition I had paid for with my sanity, whose future I had built with my own broken dreams. He looked at me not with guilt or pity, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You just can't let us be happy, can you?" he'd sneered. "You're always in the way." And then he pushed me. A single, sharp shove to the chest that sent me stumbling back, over the low railing of the balcony. The last thing I saw was his face, cold and resolute as I fell 40 stories to my death. Police probably called it a tragic accident. A distraught woman, recently divorced and destitute, had taken her own life. But I knew the truth. Mark and Leo had been colluding all along, waiting for the old woman to die so they could be rid of me and start their perfect new life with Clara. Now, sitting across from Mark at our kitchen table, the past and present collided. The sting of betrayal was no longer a fresh wound but an old, familiar scar, throbbing with the promise of vengeance. This time I was not the victim. This time I was the reckoning. I was going to send their whole family to the crematorium. Mark's voice yanked me back to the present. "Well? Do you have nothing to say?" I lifted my head and met his eyes, the eyes I had once loved so dearly. I saw the impatience there, the expectation of a fight, the readiness to list my failings. He was prepared for tears, for hysterics. He was not prepared for calm acceptance. "Fine," I said, my voice unervingly steady. "I agree to the divorce." He froze, his script suddenly torn to shreds. I could see the gears turning in his head. This was too easy. Suspicion clouded his features. If you agree, that makes this simple," he stammered, trying to regain control. "I can give you custody of Leo, but you'll have to leave with nothing. You can't expect to take half of what I've built." What he had built. The arrogance was breathtaking. I had managed our household budget, invested his bonuses wisely, and lived frugally so our family could have a secure future. And he called it all his. Before I could respond, the door to Leo's bedroom flew open. My son, no, Mark's son, stood there, his face a mask of teenage fury. "I'm not going with Mom," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "She's a control freak. She checks my phone, my homework, my life. I'd rather die than live with her." The hatred in his eyes was a perfect match for the look he'd given me before he pushed me off that building. A cold tremor, born of a memory that hadn't happened yet, ran through my body. This was the boy I had quit my job for. The boy I had spent countless hours tutoring, dragging him from a C average to the dean's list. The boy I had protected, nurtured, and loved with a ferocity that now felt like a sickness. In my previous life, his words would have been a dagger to my heart. Now they were just confirmation. A son that ungrateful wasn't a son worth keeping. Watching Leo storm off, Mark looked back at me, a smug, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Amelia, you know Leo always listens to me. As long as I tell him to, he'll agree to live with you." I stared at him, my gaze as cold as the grave I had already occupied. "I don't want custody." Mark's frown was deep, genuinely confused. "Amelia, what nonsense are you talking about? We're discussing custody here. You know I'm busy with work. I don't have time to tutor him. Without your help, his grades will plummet." Ah, so he did know. He knew that Leo's success was a direct result of my labor, my sacrifice. He just didn't value it. I gave a cold, mirthless laugh. He wants freedom and he clearly needs his dad. I'm just granting him what he wants. Is that so wrong? You take custody, and I leave with nothing. Mark shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the tile. Impossible. I looked at him with icy calm and threw the very words he had used to dismiss me in my past life right back at him. Why is it that in your eyes our son still matters less than your money? Stop trying to stir things up, he snapped, his composure cracking. But I had already seen through him, and my unwavering calm was a mirror showing him a version of himself he couldn't control. He was flustered, off balance. After a moment, he forced himself to sit down, a calculated look in his eye. Fine. I accept your terms. But I don't just want custody. I also want you to promise never to see Leo again. He doesn't need to be influenced by a cold-blooded mother like you. He knew. He knew better than anyone how much I had sacrificed for Leo. This was a test, a cruel one, designed to break me, to make me reveal my true, hysterical self. He was betting that the threat of losing Leo forever would make me crumble. Too bad for him, I had already lost Leo. I had watched him murder me. All right, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Since we've agreed on everything, let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau and sign the papers. Now. The speed of my agreement left him speechless for a second. He recovered quickly, his pride refusing to let him show any more surprise. Now? Don't you want to think about it? There's nothing to think about. Let's go. The Bureau, his eyes still carried that smug confidence. He thought this was a bluff, a last-ditch power play. Amelia, I'll give you one last chance, he said as we waited. No need, I cut him off, my eyes fixed on the clerk who was waving us forward. They've started working already. Let's hurry and get this done. I was, in fact, more eager for the divorce than he was. I was terrified that the phone call about his mother's illness would come before the ink was dry, and he would back out, trapping me once again. Mark let out a cold, mocking laugh. Stubborn as always. You'll never change. When the divorce certificate was finally in my hands, a flimsy piece of paper that represented my freedom, he still looked confident. Amelia, I know what you're thinking. There's a 30-day cooling-off period. You still have a chance to regret this, right? I actually laughed at that, a genuine, sharp sound that made him flinch. Mark, I'm afraid the one who will regret it is you. His eyes burned with anger. My career is on the rise. I'm about to be promoted to regional manager with unlimited prospects ahead. You don't even have a job. You're just a housewife living off me. Divorcing you only makes me want to set off fireworks to celebrate. I almost wanted to clap. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opened the video recorder, and pointed it at him. Let's agree on this. Whoever changes their mind is a dog. Since you're so confident, dare you record it? He glared at me through gritted teeth, his ego squarely on the line. He nodded sharply. Fine. If 30 days from now you regret it and beg me not to divorce you, you're lower than a dog. Say it to the camera, I insisted. He leaned in, his face a mask of contempt. If 30 days from now Amelia regrets this divorce and begs me to take her back, she is lower than a dog. I saved the video and put my phone away. If he dared to change his mind, I'd play it on a loop on the big screen in his office lobby. The moment we stepped out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, his phone rang. The ringtone, a specific jarring tune he'd assigned to his sister, was a sound I remembered from my past life. This was it. The bringer of bad news. What? What's wrong with Mom? He said into the receiver, his voice tight with panic. The instant I realized the bringer of bad luck was arriving, I quickly flagged down a taxi and slid inside without a backward glance. I was afraid Eleanor's misfortune might be contagious. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I saw Mark standing on the steps, his face pale, one hand clutching his phone, the other running through his hair in distress. A small, grim smile touched my lips. Let the games begin. Back in the apartment that was now solely mine until the assets were fully settled, I felt a profound silence descend. It was the silence of a battle avoided, of a prison cell left behind. Worried that Mark might come to bother me, I shut off my phone, drew the blackout curtains, and went straight to sleep. For the first time in years, I slept without the weight of 1,000 responsibilities pressing down on me. I didn't know how long I had slept when a loud bang jolted me awake. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat up in bed. The front door had been kicked open. Leo stood in the doorway, glaring at me with a ferocity that belonged to a stranger, not my child. Grandma's in the hospital and you're still sleeping, he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. What kind of daughter-in-law are you? I looked at him coldly, the remnants of sleep replaced by a chilling clarity. What does your grandmother being in the hospital have to do with me? Didn't your father tell you? We're already divorced. His face flushed a blotchy red. Get to the hospital right now and take care of Grandma, or don't blame me for never acknowledging you again. The threat was so empty, so pathetic, and yet in another life it would have been my undoing. Now it was just the final proof of his corruption. I got out of bed and walked toward him slowly. He stood his ground, chest puffed out, expecting me to cower, to plead. Without a word, I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. Crack echoed in the quiet room. He staggered back, clutching his cheek, staring at me in utter, profound disbelief. You hit me, he whispered, his voice trembling with shock and rage. Are you insane? If you can't control me, you just use violence to threaten me? I laughed, a sound full of outrage and a lifetime of pent-up bitterness. You call yourself a person? I thought you were an animal. At least animals know to be grateful to their mothers. But you? You yell at the woman who gave birth to you and raised you, calling her insane, telling her to get out. You're worse than an animal. His eyes turned red, not with tears of remorse, but with pure, undiluted hatred. I hate you, he seethed, each word a shard of glass. I never want to see you again. With that, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. 3 left, I looked at my stinging palm with a strange sense of regret. Poor hand. It was dirty now. I should have used the sole of my shoe instead. That evening, I was preparing a simple dinner for one when the door opened again. Mark walked in, throwing his jacket aside the moment he crossed the threshold. His face was a thundercloud of anger. Amelia, I think you really have lost your mind, he barked, advancing on me. You don't answer my calls. You chased our son away. What exactly are you trying to do? I looked at him calmly, wiping my hands on a towel. Mr. Carter, is there some law that says I have to answer your calls? Don't forget we're already divorced. As for Leo, I gave birth to him. If he thinks I was wrong to hit him, he can go ahead and sue me. My completely indifferent attitude was the final straw. Sent him over the edge. He kicked a nearby dining chair, sending it clattering to the floor. Amelia, aren't you afraid that Leo and I will really cut you out of our lives? You're just a full-time housewife who never dresses up, never takes care of herself. Broad shoulders, thick waist, greasy face, sloppy like a sack of potatoes. Without me, who would want you? Without your son, who's going to take care of you when you're old? The words were meant to wound, to diminish me to the nothingness he believed I was. But they were just echoes from a past I had already escaped. Without a second thought, I grabbed the kettle of now cold water from the counter and poured the entire thing over his head. I only regretted it wasn't boiling. He spluttered, gasping in shock. Without giving him a chance to react, I lunged forward, grabbed his sopping wet collar, and slammed my fist into his temple. Thwack. I married you at 25. I snarled, hitting him again. Thwack. I ran the household. I raised the kid. Thwack. I spent every day in the kitchen doing laundry and cooking to save money. I didn't buy a single new outfit for 3 years. Thwack. He was too stunned to fight back effectively, his arms flailing as he tried to shield his head. And you dare call me a sack of potatoes? I screamed, my rage a living, breathing thing. You're worse than an animal. You should just drop dead. My rage wouldn't let me stop. I rained punches down on his head and shoulders, a decade of servitude and a lifetime of betrayal fueling my strength. The man who had condemned me to a slow death through neglect, and the boy who had delivered the final blow would learn that this time the victim was gone. In her place stood an avenger. And this was only the beginning. The satisfying thud of my fists against Mark's skull was a symphony of liberation. He finally managed to shove me away, stumbling back and crashing into the overturned chair. He looked utterly ridiculous, dripping wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face a canvas of shock and burgeoning bruises. Powerful regional manager-in-waiting was just a drenched, pathetic rat in my kitchen. You're insane, he wheezed, clutching his temple. You've completely lost it. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady, though my knuckles throbbed. Get out of my house before I find out if this frying pan is as effective as my fists. He scrambled backward, fear finally overriding his anger. He fumbled for his soaked jacket and car keys, not taking his eyes off me, as if I were a rabid animal. You'll regret this, Amelia. You'll be crawling back. I'd rather crawl over broken glass, I replied, holding the cast-iron skillet threateningly. The door slammed shut, and the silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. I leaned against the counter, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Adrenaline coursed through me, a potent mix of fury and exhilaration. I had fought back. I had drawn a line in the sand, and for the first time it was them who had retreated. My first order of business was to change the locks. I couldn't rely on Mark's fear to keep him away indefinitely. I found a 24-hour locksmith online and paid a premium for an immediate service call. As the mechanic drilled out the old lock, I felt another layer of the past being stripped away. This was my sanctuary now. My fortress. Next, I turned my phone back on. It lit up with a barrage of missed calls and furious texts from Mark, and a few from unknown numbers that were likely his family. I deleted them all without reading. Then I went to the bank. It was time to secure my financial independence. During our marriage, I had maintained a separate savings account, a small nest egg I'd built from freelance design work I'd taken on sporadically over the years. Mark had always dismissed it as pin money, but it had been my lifeline, my secret proof that I still had skills beyond motherhood and housekeeping. I withdrew every last cent. It wasn't a fortune, enough to live on for a few months if I was careful, but it was mine. untouched by Mark's influence, untainted by his betrayal. With cash in hand and a new set of keys, I felt a surge of power. But I knew this was just the calm before the storm. Mark's mother, Eleanor, was in the hospital. Paralysis, I knew from my previous life, was permanent. And Mark, the golden boy, was not equipped to handle it. He would try to shove the responsibility onto someone else, and with me officially out of the picture, his options were limited. His sister, Diana, lived across the country and had washed her hands of their demanding mother years ago. Clara, the mistress, was not the type to wipe an old woman's backside. He would be back. He would try to manipulate, guilt, or threaten me into resuming my role as the unpaid caretaker. I couldn't be here when he did. I booked a train ticket to a coastal town a few hours away. A small, quiet bed and breakfast with no connection to my old life. I packed a single bag with essentials, my laptop, and all my important documents, passport, birth certificate, and the precious divorce papers. I was leaving the gilded cage, and I wasn't looking back. Just as I was zipping up my suitcase, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I had a feeling I knew who it was. I answered, putting it on speaker as I continued to get ready. Amelia? It's Diana, Mark's sister. Her voice was tight, laced with a familiar, long-suffering exasperation. I heard about you and Mark. I'm sorry, but, well, we have a situation. Mom had a stroke. She's paralyzed. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, my tone neutral, devoid of the sympathy she was fishing for. There was a pause. She's being discharged in a couple of days. Mark is overwhelmed with work. You know how he is. And with the divorce and Leo, it's a mess. But we were hoping you could help out, just for a little while. For Leo's sake. There it was. The guilt trip. The appeal to my maternal instincts. It had worked like a charm in my previous life. Diana, I said calmly. As you know, Mark and I are divorced. My obligations to his family are legally and morally terminated. I suggest you hire a nurse. Or perhaps Mark should reduce his hours. His mother, his responsibility. The silence on the other end was stunned. Amelia, how can you be so cold? After everything our family has done for you. What have you done for me, Diana? I asked, genuinely curious. You visited twice in 10 years, both times expecting to be waited on hand and foot. You've never once offered to help with your mother, even for a weekend. Your family took my labor for granted for a decade. That debt has been paid. In full. You'll regret this, she hissed, her facade of civility crumbling. When you're old and alone, don't come crying to us. The only thing I regret, I said softly, is not doing this 10 years ago. I ended the call and blocked the number. I arrived at the seaside B&B as the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air smelled of salt and pine, a clean, sharp contrast to the stale air of my old life. I spent the next few days in a state of blissful isolation. I walked on the beach, ate when I was hungry, slept when I was tired, and started sketching again. Creative part of my brain, long atrophied from disuse, began to stir, tentative and rusty at first, then with growing confidence. I was free. Truly, utterly free. But freedom was not the same as victory. Mark and Leo were still out there, living in the house I had made a home, plotting their future with Clara. The 30-day cooling-off period was a sword of Damocles. I knew Mark. His arrogance would soon be replaced by panic as the reality of his situation sank in. A paralyzed mother, a rebellious son, a demanding job, and a mistress who expected to be spoiled, not saddled with baggage. He would try to backtrack. He would claim he never meant it, that it was a mistake. And he would use Leo as his primary weapon. I was prepared. The video on my phone was my insurance policy. But I needed more. I needed to ensure that when the time came, I could strike a decisive, final blow. I logged onto a professional networking site and updated my profile for the first time in over a decade. I listed my old skills, my degree, and the freelance projects I'd completed. It was a start. Then, I did something I should have done long ago. I hired a private investigator. His name was Ben, a no-nonsense former cop recommended through an obscure online forum for women in difficult divorces. I transferred him a retainer from my savings and gave him his instructions. Follow Mark. Document his affair with Clara. I needed photos, dates, times. Concrete evidence of infidelity that could be used in court if he tried to contest the divorce terms. Ben was efficient. Within 48 hours, he sent me the first batch of photos. Mark and Clara having an intimate dinner, their hands intertwined across the table. Another of them kissing in the parking lot outside his office. It was nauseating, but it was also power. I saved every file to a secure cloud drive. The days of my self-imposed exile passed peacefully. I started working on a new digital portfolio, my fingers slowly remembering the shortcuts and commands of design software. It was challenging and exhilarating. I was rebuilding myself piece by piece. On the 10th day, my phone rang. It was Ben. "You might want to see this," he said, his voice grim. "It's about your son." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "What about him?" "He's been skipping school. Hanging out with a rough crowd. I've got photos of him and a few other kids, let's just say they aren't studying at the library." He emailed me the pictures. There was Leo, looking older and harder than his years, hanging outside a convenience store with kids who looked like they'd already given up on life. In one photo, he was smoking. In another, he was handing cash to one of the boys. My first instinct, the ghost of my old self, was a surge of panic. He's going to ruin his future. I have to stop him. But I quashed it. His future was his own to ruin. He had made his choice. He had chosen his father. He had chosen freedom from my control. I would grant him that freedom in all its glorious, destructive entirety. "Thank you, Ben," I said, my voice cold. "Keep documenting. Especially any interactions with Mark or Clara." I ended the call and looked out at the tranquil sea. The storm was brewing on the horizon. Mark's promotion, his perfect new life with Clara, it was all a house of cards. And I was about to unleash a hurricane. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet elderly woman who had always been kind to me. "Amelia, dear, I hope you're well. I thought you should know Leo and his father had a terrible row on the front lawn this morning. Mark was shouting about the hospital bills and a nurse quitting. Leo shouted back that it wasn't his problem and that he wished he lived with you. He then stormed off. It all looked very upsetting. I stared at the message. He wished he lived with you. The words were a phantom limb, aching with a pain that no longer existed. In another life, this message would have sent me running back, my heart breaking for my poor, misunderstood boy. I would have seen it as a cry for help, an opportunity to mend our broken relationship. Now I saw it for what it was, the first sign of the collapse. Leo was discovering that the freedom he craved came with a price. A father who was absent, stressed, and resentful, and a grandmother who was a full-time burden. He was realizing that I wasn't the jailer. I was the warden who had kept the real monsters at bay. I typed back a simple reply. "Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Gable. I'm sure they'll work it out. Hope you're keeping well." I put the phone down and returned to my sketch pad. I was drawing a phoenix, rising from the ashes. Felt fitting. Peace held for another week. I continued my routine of walks, design work, and quiet evenings. My portfolio was taking shape. I even mustered the courage to apply for a few remote freelance positions. The world was slowly opening up to me. Then, on the morning of the 20th day since the divorce, the storm finally reached my shores. I was having coffee on the small balcony of my room when I saw a familiar car, Mark's sleek silver sedan, pull into the B&B's parking lot. My body went rigid. He got out, looking harried and unkempt. His suit was wrinkled and there were dark circles under his eyes. Confident executive was gone, replaced by a man buckling under pressure. He scanned the building, and his eyes locked onto mine on the second-floor balcony. A mixture of relief and anger crossed his face. He strode toward the stairs. I didn't move. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, waiting. A few moments later, there was a knock on my door. It wasn't a frantic pounding, but a tired, defeated tap. I opened it. He stood there, his shoulders slumped. "Amelia," he began, his voice rough. "We need to talk." "About what, Mark?" "We've said all there is to say." "It's about Leo," he said, his trump card. He's not doing well. He's failing his classes. He's gotten into fights. He misses you." I leaned against the doorframe, regarding him with icy detachment. He told me he never wanted to see me again. I'm respecting his wishes. He's a teenager. He doesn't know what he wants. Mark's voice rose in frustration. "You're his mother. Don't you care?" "I did care," I said softly. "I cared enough to sacrifice everything for him. And he repaid me with hatred. You both did. You don't get to summon me back now that you've discovered the job is harder than you thought." His composure broke. "Damn it, Amelia. My mother is paralyzed. I'm drowning at work. Leo is spinning out of control. I can't do this alone." "You're not alone," I pointed out. "You have Clara. Perhaps she'd like to play stepmommy and nurse. It's a package deal." His face flushed with anger and shame. He knew I knew. "This is your fault. If you hadn't been so stubborn, if you had just been reasonable." I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Reasonable? You mean if I had agreed to be your unpaid servant for another 10 years? No, thank you." I started to close the door. "Wait." He shoved his foot in the doorway. "The divorce, the cooling-off period. I was wrong, Amelia. I made a mistake. Let's call it off. We can go back to the way things were. For Leo's sake." There it was. The moment I had been waiting for. The groveling retraction. I looked at him, this broken, pathetic man, and felt nothing but contempt. I pulled out my phone, navigated to the video, and pressed play. His own voice, filled with arrogant certainty, filled the space between us. "If 30 days from now, Amelia regrets this divorce and begs me to take her back, she is lower than a dog." Color drained from Mark's face. He looked from the phone to my face, his eyes wide with horror. I stopped the video. "You were saying, Mark? Did you come here to bark for me?" His expression twisted from shock to pure, unadulterated rage. "You bitch," he whispered. "That's Ms. Bitch to you," I said sweetly. "Now remove your foot from my door before I break it." He yanked his foot back as if burned. "You'll pay for this, Amelia. I swear you'll pay." "I've already paid," I said, my voice dropping all pretense of amusement. "I paid with 10 years of my life. I paid with my dignity. I paid with my son. I have nothing left for you to take. Now get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I slammed the door in his face and locked it. I heard him let out a strangled roar of fury, followed by the sound of him kicking the railing outside before his footsteps stomped away down the stairs. I stood there, listening as his car peeled out of the parking lot. My heart was pounding, but not with fear. With triumph. First major battle was won. He had shown his hand. He was desperate. And a desperate man makes mistakes. I looked at the calendar. 10 more days until the divorce was final. 10 more days until I was permanently, irrevocably free from the man who had destroyed me. But freedom was no longer enough. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to visit the hospital. It was time to see dear old Eleanor. The encounter with Mark left me not with anxiety, but with a cold, clear focus. His desperation was a weapon I could wield. He was no longer the puppet master. He was a man frantically trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. I checked out of the B&B an hour after he left, my small bag packed, my mind already racing ahead. I didn't go home. I headed straight for the city, for the hospital where Eleanor was housed. I needed to see the situation for myself to understand the exact nature of the battlefield. I also needed to be seen. I wanted Mark to know I was back, that I was close, and that I was utterly unmoved by his plight. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair, a familiar scent from my previous life. I walked the linoleum-floored corridors with a sense of grim déjà vu. I found Eleanor's room without having to ask at the nurse's station. I remembered the number. I paused outside the door, steeling myself. Pushing it open, the scene was exactly as I remembered from a decade ago, yet completely different. There she was, propped up in the bed, her face a pale, sunken mask of self-pity. A stroke had stolen the movement from the right side of her body, and with it, the last vestiges of her false civility. Her eyes, sharp and critical as ever, locked onto me the moment I entered. "You," she slurred, the word thick and dripping with venom. "Where have you been?" "I've been lying here, neglected. That useless son of mine hires incompetent nurses who don't know how to do anything." In my past life, her words would have been a lash, driving me to prove my worth, to work harder to earn her impossible approval. Now they were just the pathetic buzzing of a trapped fly. "Eleanor," I said, my voice flat. "You look well." She glared, her good hand clenching the sheet. "Don't you take that tone with me. Get me some water. And adjust this pillow. It's choking me." I didn't move. I stood at the foot of her bed, observing her like a specimen. "I'm not your nurse, Eleanor. I'm not your daughter-in-law. We have no relation anymore. I'm just a concerned acquaintance." Her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful wretch. After everything my family has done for you. We took you in. We gave you a life." The old tired script. I almost felt sorry for her, trapped in her own narrative of superiority. "You gave me a life of servitude," I corrected her calmly. "And I've resigned from the position. I hear Mark is having trouble finding a replacement. It seems good help really is hard to find." I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes then. She was realizing that her primary caretaker, the one she had considered a permanent fixture, was truly gone. Her son's promises of a better life with Clara were crumbling in the face of her own incontinence and demanding nature. "Mark will make you come back," she whispered, a desperate threat. "He'll make you." "I'd like to see him try," I said with a small, cold smile. I turned to leave. "Goodbye, Eleanor. I don't expect we'll see each other again." As I walked out, I heard her begin to wail, a high, pathetic sound of genuine terror. It was music to my ears. The next few days were a waiting game. I stayed with my parents, helping them regain their strength and their peace. I continued working on my portfolio, and to my shock and delight, I landed my first freelance client, a small boutique hotel that needed new marketing materials. Pay wasn't much, but it was a start. It was proof. I kept a close eye on the calendar. The 30-day cooling-off period was ending. I immediately arranged to meet Mark at the Civil Affairs Bureau to finalize everything. The morning of, I was there at 9 a.m. sharp. By 10 o'clock, he still hadn't shown up. My calls went straight to voicemail. He was standing me up. The coward thought he could ignore this into oblivion. So I played my card. I called one of his junior colleagues, a young man named David who had always had a bit of a crush on me and who I knew was ambitious and disliked Mark. "David, hi, it's Amelia Carter," I said, my voice sweet and slightly worried. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but Mark was supposed to meet me for a critical family medical appointment an hour ago and he's not answering his phone. I'm just worried something's happened. Is he there?" Less than a minute after I hung up, my phone rang. It was Mark, his voice sharp with fury. "Amelia, what the hell are you trying to do?" I sneered. You stand me up and then ask me that? Are we getting this divorce finalized or not? His tone hardened, the last vestige of his bargaining position. No. I'm not agreeing to the previous terms. Unless you give me all the property, you're not just walking away. He was trying to blackmail me. He thought I was so desperate to be free that I'd pay any price. I laughed, a genuine hearty laugh. Then we'll take it to court. You cheated during the marriage. When the judge rules in my favor, you'll lose everything. The house, your savings, and your precious reputation will be ruined. You're lying, he roared, but the fear was evident in his voice. Am I? I didn't bother arguing. I simply opened my email, attached 3 of the most incriminating photos Ben had sent me, Mark and Clara in a passionate embrace outside a hotel, and sent them to his phone. See you in court, I typed. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear his world shattering. Less than half an hour later, he stormed into the Civil Affairs Bureau, his face ashen. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in as many days. He glared at me like he wanted to strangle me on the spot. Amelia, destroying me, what good does it do you? He seethed, grabbing my arm. Aren't you afraid Leo will never acknowledge you as his mother again? Even now, at the end, he still thought that was my weak spot. I shook his hand off as if it were a diseased insect. Cut the crap. Come with me to get the divorce certificate. I turned and took a number for the counter. I didn't believe he'd dare walk away from this building now. He had worked 10 years to get to where he was, and the more he valued something, the more desperate he was to keep it. His career was all he had left. Seeing I was serious, and with the photographic evidence burning a hole in his pocket, he capitulated. The staff processed the paperwork with efficient boredom. Soon, the final divorce certificate was in my hands. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt heavier than any contract I'd ever signed. It was my emancipation proclamation. On the way out, he still tried to muster a threat, his voice a low growl. You'll regret this one day. I didn't even look back. I already have. And now it's your turn. I got into my car, the certificate placed carefully in my bag. The first major war was over. I had won my freedom and protected my parents. But the battle for total victory was just beginning. I had the house, but it was a trophy, a reminder of a life I never wanted to return to. It was time to turn that trophy into a weapon. I knew what I had to do next. It was time to liquidate the past. It was time to sell the house out from under them. The final divorce certificate in my hand was more than a legal document. It was a key. It unlocked the final chains, granting me the legal authority to sever every last tie. The first and most symbolic tie was the house, the beautiful, spacious home I had turned into a gilded cage. It was in my name, a concession Mark had made during the cooling-off period when he was still arrogantly confident I would crawl back. His arrogance was now my greatest asset. I didn't go to a traditional real estate agency. That would take too long, and I needed this done quickly and decisively. I remembered a client my father had done business with years ago, a man named Mr. Chen who ran a private lending and investment company. He was known for being sharp, discreet, and for having a network of people who weren't afraid of complicated situations. He was the perfect solution. I met him in his modest, unassuming office. He was a man in his 50s with calm eyes and a firm handshake. I laid it out plainly, no sugarcoating. Mr. Chen, I have a property. Fully paid, clear title in my name. My ex-husband and son are currently living there, and they are hostile. I need it sold fast and as is. I understand that the presence of reluctant occupants might affect the price. I'm prepared for that. Mr. Chen listened intently, his fingers steepled. Hostile occupants can be a problem, he said slowly. But not an insurmountable one. My company sometimes acquires properties for our portfolio. We have our own methods of ensuring a smooth transition. The price, however, would be significantly below market value. I'm not looking for market value. I said, meeting his gaze. I'm looking for speed and finality. I want it off my hands and out of my life. Today. He nodded, understanding perfectly. We negotiated a price. It was a lowball offer, a fraction of what the house was truly worth. But it was cash, immediate, and it came with the unspoken promise that he and his team would handle the eviction. For me, it wasn't a loss, it was the cost of my freedom and my revenge. I was paying them to take my problem away. Paperwork was drawn up with startling efficiency. By the afternoon, the deed was transferred, and the funds were wired into my new separate bank account. The number that appeared on my screen was life-changing. It wasn't the full value of the house, but it was more than enough for me to start over luxuriously anywhere I wanted. More importantly, it was money Mark had counted on, money he believed was his. I had just pulled the financial rug out from under him. Mr. Chen handed me the keys to a small safety deposit box. A copy of everything, he said. And my card. If you ever need to refer business. He gave me a knowing look. I smiled. I may have some in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chen. As I walked out of his office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The anchor of that house, of that life, was gone. Now I just had to wait for the fireworks. I didn't have to wait long. A few days later, I brought a few of Mr. Chen's men with me to the house. They weren't thugs, but they were tall, broad-shouldered, and had a quiet, intimidating presence. I needed to be there to see this. I needed to witness the moment Mark and Leo lost their sanctuary. The moment we walked in, the scene was one of domestic decay. The living room was a mess of takeout containers and unwashed laundry. Mark was on the couch, staring at his phone, his face haggard. Leo was slouched in an armchair, headphones on, oblivious. The stench of neglect hung in the air. Mark's face darkened when he saw me. Amelia? What are you doing here? Before he could say another word, the old viper, Eleanor, barked from her hospital bed in the corner of the living room. If you want us out, you'll have to step over my dead body. Leo ripped his headphones off, his eyes blazing with the familiar hatred. Emma, he spat, not even granting me the title of mom. Dad's already divorced you. What more do you want? I didn't bother answering him. I simply gestured to the three men behind me. Do it! The man in the lead, a quiet individual introduced only as Blade, stepped forward and clamped a hand down on Mark's shoulder. Time to go, Mr. Carter. Mark panicked, scrambling to his feet. What are you doing? This is my house. I'll call the cops on you, he shouted, his voice cracking. Blade didn't flinch. He reached into his bag, pulled out the property deed, and held it up in front of Mark's face. This is my house now. You're living in my place and still think you can call the cops on me? Have you lost your mind? I could see the neighbors gathering outside the open door, their eyes wide with shock and morbid curiosity. Mark turned to me, his expression twisted in confusion and dawning horror. Amelia, what the hell is going on? I sold the house, Mark, I said, my voice calm and clear for the neighbors to hear. You and Leo have to leave. Now. You can't. This is our home, he sputtered, his world collapsing in real time. I can and I did, I replied. The paperwork is legal and in order. You have no claim here. Blade gave Mark a not-so-gentle shove toward the door. Let's not make this difficult. Pack your essentials. You have 1 hour. The reality of the situation finally sank in. The always arrogant Mark, the man who had belittled me as a worthless housewife, was suddenly on his knees. Brother, I was wrong, he begged Blade, his voice pathetic. I'll move out right now. Okay? Just don't hurt me. Eleanor, seeing her golden boy brought so low, started wailing. Fine, fine. Don't hurt my boy. We'll go. We'll go, please. It was a humiliating spectacle. Leo watched it all, his face pale, his earlier bravado completely gone. He looked like a scared child, which is what he was. He had chosen this. He had chosen the father who was now a sniveling coward, begging on his knees. Within the hour, they were gone. Mr. Chen's men efficiently escorted them out, their pathetic belongings thrown into trash bags. Mark, Leo, and a weeping Eleanor were unceremoniously loaded into Mark's car. I stood on the sidewalk, watching them drive away, the last vestige of my old life disappearing around the corner. Blade gave me a wave. "If that's all, we'll get going." I smiled, took out a thick red envelope from my purse, and handed it to him. "Thanks, brother. Wishing you a prosperous move." These guys really knew their stuff. A few $100 for a video this satisfying was more than worth it. I saved it to a secure folder labeled Karma. With the house gone and my finances secure, it was time to create some distance. I immediately headed back to my parents' house. My father's health had recovered, but the stress had taken its toll. I needed them safe and far away from any potential fallout. "I've booked you a trip," I announced, presenting them with the itineraries. A 1-month tour of Europe. First class all the way. Pure leisure, no shopping stops. "I want you to relax and see the world." They were hesitant at first, worried about me, about the cost. But I insisted. "I have more than enough money now. Please do this for me. Let me know you're safe and happy. It's the only thing I want." I saw the moment they relented, the excitement beginning to sparkle in their eyes. It was a joy I hadn't felt in a long time, the joy of giving back to the people who truly loved me. I drove them to the airport a few days later, hugging them tightly before they passed through security. "Don't worry about a thing," I whispered to my mother. "I have everything under control." As soon as their plane was in the air, I felt a chapter close. They were safe. Now I could focus entirely on the final act of my revenge. It was time to dismantle the rest of Mark's life. I went home, powered up my laptop, and opened an email draft I had prepared in advance. It was time to settle the debts from my past life with the scumbag once and for all. The email contained a meticulously compiled dossier of evidence of Mark's affair with his co-worker Clara Zhao. I had photos, dates, and even records, obtained by Ben, of Mark abusing his position to get Clara her job and funnel projects her way. I detailed their trysts in his office under the pretense of working late. It was a career-ending, reputation-destroying bomb, and I was going to deliver it from the most devastating location possible. Using a piece of sophisticated software Ben had also recommended, I remotely accessed Mark's work computer. It was shockingly easy. His password was still Leo's birthday. The arrogance. I logged into his corporate email account and attached the entire dossier. My finger hovered over the send button for just a second. This was the point of no return. This would not only ruin him but likely Clara as well. I thought of her, the woman who had happily stepped into my life, who had probably laughed with Mark about the frumpy, controlling wife he was stuck with. I felt no pity. I hit send. The email went out from Mark's own account to the entire company directory, every executive, every manager, every intern. I also blind carbon copied the HR department and, for good measure, Clara's notoriously volatile ex-husband. According to my research, he was extremely jealous and had a history of violence, which was the real reason Clara had divorced him. If he learned that Clara had been involved with Mark during her divorce proceedings, there was no way he'd let them off easily. I logged out, wiped my digital tracks, and closed my laptop. The deed was done. All that was left was to wait for the explosion. It didn't take long. A few days later, a former friend who still worked at the company called me, her voice buzzing with gossip. "Amelia, you will not believe what happened. Mark and Clara were fired." "Really?" I said, feigning surprise. "What happened?" Apparently, Mark sent a company-wide email by mistake. It had all these pictures of him and Clara and details about their affair. It was a bloodbath. Then, Clara's ex-husband showed up at the office and started beating her. Mark tried to sneak away, but Clara screamed for him and the ex turned on him. He beat Mark like a dead dog. Purity had to tear him off. Police were called. It was insane. I listened, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. How terrible for them, I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. The official word is they were terminated for severely damaging the company's image and causing significant losses, she continued. Firing them without demanding compensation was considered merciful. Mark was too ashamed to fight it. He's been blacklisted in the industry. No one will touch him. I thanked her for the information and hung up. Plan had worked perfectly. Mark's career, the thing he valued above all else, was ashes. He was unemployed, unemployable, living off what little rental income he had from a small investment property, and saddled with a paralyzed mother and a resentful son. A neighbor from my old street messaged me soon after, saying they'd seen Mark and Leo lurking around, asking about me. I pulled up the feed from the camera I'd installed at my parents' house just in time to see Mark on the doorstep, questioning a neighbor. From the neighbor's words, he learned I wasn't home and that my parents were away traveling with no plans to return soon. Mark stomped his foot in frustration on the porch. Damn you, Amelia. You really played dirty. Leo, standing behind him, looked impatient and sullen. If she doesn't want to see us, then forget it. What are we supposed to do, beg her? I'm hungry. Hurry up and take me to KFC. Mark, still fuming, heard Leo's words. He suddenly swung around and kicked Leo hard in the shin. Eat, eat, eat. That's all you know, you useless idiot. Is there anything you can do besides stuffing your face? Leo's eyes widened in shock and pain. Dad, you actually hit me? Mark snapped, his patience gone. If it weren't for trying to keep a fool like you around, would I have had to walk away from the marriage with nothing? I'm telling you, if I don't get back the money from selling that house, you'll be the first one He cut himself off, but his rage was uncontrollable. He kicked Leo again. Ryan stormed off in anger, limping slightly. Watching his retreating back on the security feed, I let out a cold laugh. White-eyed wolf, I whispered to the screen. Your real retribution has just begun. The father-son alliance, built on a foundation of shared contempt for me, was cracking. The stress of poverty, failure, and responsibility was turning them against each other. It was a beautiful, poetic justice. But it still wasn't enough. Mark was broken, but he was still breathing. Leo was suffering, but he was still free. I had promised them a crematorium. It was time to stoke the flames. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Mr. Chen answered on the second ring. Mr. Chen, I said, my voice businesslike. I have another idea. Are you interested? Mr. Chen listened on the other end of the line, his silence more telling than any words. I'm always interested in viable business, Ms. Carter, he finally said, his voice a low, calm rumble. What is your idea? It's about my ex-husband Mark, I began, choosing my words carefully. He's prideful, arrogant, and now desperate. He's lost his job, his reputation, and his primary asset. But he still has a small rental property, a bit of savings, and most importantly, the belief that he can somehow bounce back. I see, Mr. Chen said. I could almost hear the gears turning in his shrewd mind. I was thinking, I continued, that a man in his position might be susceptible to a high-risk, high-reward opportunity. Something that promises a quick restoration of his fortune. Something that would appeal to his wounded ego. You're suggesting we offer him an investment? Mr. Chen asked, a note of amusement in his voice. Not an investment. Temptation, I clarified. I've heard your company has diverse interests. Perhaps one of those interests could involve a high-stakes poker game or a sports betting ring, something that preys on a desperate man's need to feel lucky again. I can provide insights into his psychological state, his triggers. I can make sure he's in the right place at the right time to receive an invitation. There was a long pause. Miss Carter, what you're describing requires a very specific finesse, and it carries risk for my organization. I understand, I said. And I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. Merely to extend an opportunity. What he does with it is his own choice. As for the risk, I believe the potential return for you would be significant. He still has assets to lose. And I am prepared to offer a referral fee for any business you generate from him, as we discussed. It was a cold, calculated proposal. I was essentially handing Mark over to a loan shark, setting him up for a fall I knew was inevitable. I was no longer just reacting to his attacks. I was actively engineering his destruction. Mr. Chen was silent for a moment longer. Leave it to me, Ms. Carter. I'll have one of my associates, Blade, make contact. We'll ensure Mr. Carter feels welcomed. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. This was a new level of darkness. But the memory of the rooftop, of Leo's hate-filled eyes, hardened my resolve. They had shown me no mercy. I would show them none. The next few weeks were a study in schadenfreude, delivered to me in regular updates from my network of sympathetic friends and the ever-reliable Ben. Mark, as predicted, took the bait. Humbled and furious, he was easy prey for Blade's carefully crafted approach. They met by chance at a bar Mark had started frequenting. Blade, playing the part of a successful, slightly dangerous entrepreneur, sympathized with Mark's unfair situation. He spoke of quick turnarounds, of insider tips, of a world where real men took risks and got rewarded. Mark, whose entire identity was built on being the smartest man in the room, lapped it up. He started small, betting on sports games. He won a little, just enough to hook him. Then Blade introduced him to a private poker game. The stakes were high, the atmosphere thick with cigar smoke and false camaraderie. Mark, believing his analytical mind gave him an edge, dove in headfirst. He lost. Badly. He drained his remaining savings. Then he took out a massive high-interest loan from Mr. Chen's company, using his last remaining asset, the rental property, as collateral. He was sure he could win it all back. It was just a streak of bad luck. He lost that too. The updates became more grim. Mark was now drowning in debt. Clara Zhao, seeing the writing on the wall, dumped him immediately. She hadn't signed up for a broke, indebted man with a paralyzed mother and a teenage son. Her departure was the final nail in the coffin of Mark's fantasy life. My friends, those who knew the full story, thought this was enough. He's lost everything, Amelia, one said over coffee. His career, his money, his mistress. Isn't that sufficient? You should let go and start your new life. I just smiled and sipped my coffee. He still has his health, I said softly. And his freedom. That's more than he left me with. They didn't understand. They saw a man who had fallen far. I saw a man who needed to be buried. Ben's reports on Leo were equally satisfying in their own tragic way. With no one to supervise him, Leo had dropped out of school entirely. He spent his days drifting, his nights getting into trouble with his new, rougher friends. He was no longer the entitled brat. He was a hollow-eyed young man, ground down by a reality he was never prepared to handle. He was also Mark's primary punching bag. The man who had once smugly told me that Leo always listened to him now only communicated with his son through a filter of rage and blame. Every lost bet, every call from a debt collector, every foul-smelling chore related to Eleanor's care, resulted in verbal abuse and sometimes physical violence directed at Leo. The son who had idolized his father now looked at him with a mixture of fear and loathing. The father-son bond, the alliance that had killed me, was now a chain of mutual hatred. It was perfect. 3 months after I had initiated my plan with Mr. Chen, I came home to my new, sleek apartment to find a familiar figure lurking outside. Mark. He looked like a ghost of his former self. His clothes were rumpled and dirty, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken and desperate. The moment he saw me, he rushed over, thrusting a bedraggled bouquet of gas station flowers toward me. Amelia! I finally found you. The smell of stale alcohol and unwashed body hit me like a physical blow. I immediately stepped back 3 paces. Did you fall into a cesspit? Your mouth smells foul. Get away from me. A flash of humiliation crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a desperate, manic energy. He plastered on a grotesque parody of a smile and moved closer. Amelia, don't be like this. I came today with good news. I stared at him, utterly repulsed. Good news. He blurted it out eagerly, as if presenting me with a winning lottery ticket. Amelia, my mom's dead. Come back with me. Leo misses you. Let's go back to the way things were. Our happy family of 3. I actually laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound that echoed in the quiet street. This scumbag was proud of his good news. His own mother had died. The woman he had trapped me into caring for was gone, and instead of mourning, he was parading her death around like a prize that should entice me back. In my previous life, that old viper had lasted 10 more years under my dedicated care. This time, driven to an early grave by her darling son's neglect and abuse, she had succumbed quickly. It was the fitting end she deserved. Mark leaned in closer when I didn't answer, his breath toxic. Amelia, He didn't get to finish. I slammed my foot hard into his crotch. He let out a high-pitched gasp, doubling over and collapsing to the pavement. I told you to stay away from me, I said, my voice cold as ice. Can't you understand human speech? You disgust me. He writhed on the ground, his face turning a purplish red. When he could finally speak, his voice was a venomous hiss. Amelia, I've been giving you face. Don't push me. I sneered down at him. Or what? You'll hit me? You're just a broke gambling addict drowning in debt. What could I possibly have to fear from you? His eyes, bloodshot and wild, turned truly vicious. Don't think I won't drag you down with me. My gaze shifted past him, and I smiled at the sight behind him. Hey, I called out cheerfully. Someone here says he wants to drag me down with him. Mark's face went ghost white, all the color draining away as pure terror flooded his features. He didn't even need to turn around. Blade and 2 of his associates were already standing there, having emerged silently from a black van parked nearby. They looked even more intimidating than I remembered. Mark scrambled to his knees, clutching his groin, his body trembling. Blade. Why are you here? Blade gave a cold, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. You owe me money, Carter. A lot of money. And you've been avoiding my calls. You still dare to run? I'm going to make you pay for that today. Mark begged, his words a desperate, sobbing jumble. Please, Blade. I'll get it. I just need more time. Please. Blade didn't buy it for a second. He nodded to his men. They dragged us screaming, pleading Mark to the side of the building, into the shadows of an alley. I stood there, listening to the sickening thuds of fists meeting flesh, the grunts of effort from Blade's men, and Mark's howls of pain. I felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. It wasn't joy. It was colder, deeper than that. It was the feeling of a cosmic balance being restored. This was the man who had condemned me to a slow, soul-crushing death, followed by a violent, brutal one. Watching him receive his own measure of pain was a necessary, righteous catharsis. Eventually, the sounds stopped. Blade's men emerged, dragging a barely conscious, battered Mark between them. They shoved him into the back of the van. Once they were gone, I walked over to Blade, who was calmly wiping his hands with a handkerchief. Thank you, Blade, I said. And thank Mr. Chen for me, too. Blade gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. No need. He walked right into it. We didn't even have to put in much effort. He got into the driver's seat of the van. We'll make sure he understands the terms of his repayment. As the van drove off, disappearing into the city's night, I felt half the weight in my chest finally lift. The scumbag was finally facing the consequences he deserved. He was in the hands of professionals now. His life would be a waking nightmare of fear, debt, and pain. I went upstairs to my apartment, the silence feeling cleaner, more peaceful than before. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out at the glittering city. Mark was as good as dead to me. He was broken, owned, and suffering. Part of me wondered if it was enough. But there was still Leo, the white-eyed wolf, the final piece of the puzzle. I didn't have to wait long for the last act to play out. A few days later, I got a call from a detective with the city police. His voice was somber and official. "Ms. Carter? I'm Detective Evans. I'm calling about your ex-husband, Mark Carter." My heart didn't even skip a beat. "Yes? What about him?" There was a pause. "I'm sorry to inform you that he is deceased." I was silent, letting the words hang in the air. "How?" I finally asked, my voice perfectly calibrated to sound shocked and sad. "It appears to be an accident," the detective said. "According to your son, Ryan, who is the only witness, they were arguing in their apartment. Mr. Carter was intoxicated and became violent. During the struggle, he fell from the balcony. It was the 12th floor. He died on impact." I closed my eyes. So it was Leo after all. In this life, as in the last, he had been the one to deliver the fatal push. The symmetry was chilling. Cause and effect. Retribution. "The reason for my call, Ms. Carter," the detective continued, "is that your son Ryan is currently in custody. He's been charged with manslaughter. His mental state is fragile. He's refusing to eat or drink, and he keeps demanding to see you. As his only remaining parent, we were hoping you might be willing to come down and speak with him." I took a slow, deep breath. This was the final meeting. The last page of this bloody, rewritten story. "I'll be there," I said. The police station was a monument to sterile, fluorescent-lit misery. The air smelled of stale coffee, sweat, and despair. Detective Evans, a man with a tired face and a non-judgmental demeanor, led me to a small, windowless interview room. "It's not a pretty situation, Ms. Carter," he said, his voice low. "The boy is broken. He vacillates between catatonic silence and hysterical outbursts. The only thing he's been consistent about is asking for you." I nodded, my face a mask of appropriate maternal concern. Inside, my heart was a block of ice. "Thank you, Detective. I'll see what I can do." He opened the door for me and I stepped inside. It had been just over 6 months since I'd last seen Leo, but the figure slumped over the scarred metal table was almost unrecognizable. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a gaunt, unkempt stranger. His hair was greasy and uncombed. His clothes hung off his thin frame, and his hands, cuffed in front of him, trembled uncontrollably. He looked like a sewer rat pulled from the darkness, his eyes wide with a perpetual trapped terror. When he saw me, a jolt went through him. His expression lit up with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Mom," he croaked, his voice raw. You finally came." I sat down across from him, placing my purse neatly on the table. I didn't speak. I just looked at him, taking in the full measure of his ruin. "I know I was wrong," he rushed on, the words tumbling out in a frantic plea. "I know it. Please, I'm begging you. Save me. Get me out of here. I'm your son. You can't just let me die in here." His eyes begged for a forgiveness that had been incinerated in the fire of my rebirth. I looked at him calmly, my heart an utterly unmoved fortress. "Leo," I said, my voice quiet and even, "isn't this the freedom you once begged for? The freedom you said was worth life or death. Why don't you like it now?" He froze. My words, so cold and deliberate, didn't compute. They weren't the script he had written in his head. He had expected tears, reassurances, a mother's blind, forgiving love. He had not expected this icy reflection of his own cruelty. Confusion in his eyes curdled, transforming in an instant into pure, undiluted venom. The mask of the repentant son shattered, revealing the white-eyed wolf beneath. "Emma," he hissed, my name a curse on his lips. You vicious woman. This is all your fault. Why did you have to divorce Dad? The shift was so sudden, so absolute, it was almost fascinating. The blame, even now at the very end, was mine to bear. He leaned forward, his cuffed hands slamming on the table. The one who should have died is you. I was a top university graduate, an executive at a major company with a six-figure salary. I was meant to have a happy life. You ruined everything. I blinked, a genuine shock running through me for the first time. The specifics. Top university graduate. Executive. Six-figure salary. Those were the details of the future he had stolen from me in my previous life. He wasn't just lamenting a lost potential. He was mourning a future he remembered living. He had been reborn too. But his timing, his understanding, was a tragic joke. He had been granted a second chance only to squander it even more spectacularly, blinded by the same hatred and entitlement that had defined him before. He had retained the memory of the prize, but not the memory of the price I had paid for it, nor the crime he had committed to keep it. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was a cosmic correction. I stood up, looking down at my son, my murderer, the living testament to my failure and his own inherent rot. So what? I said, my voice dripping with a final, devastating dismissal. You're still going to spend the rest of your life in prison. I leaned in slightly, ensuring he saw the absolute lack of feeling in my eyes. Enjoy it, white-eyed wolf. I turned and walked toward the door, my steps even and sure. Behind me, he erupted. A guttural roar of pure, impotent rage, followed by the sound of his fists pounding the table, and then a wrenching, animalistic sob of utter defeat. I didn't look back. I opened the door and stepped out, closing it firmly on the wreckage of my past life. Detective Evans was waiting. That was brief. Is there anything you can tell us? Anything that might help his case? I looked at him, my expression one of profound and genuine sadness. It wasn't for Leo. It was for the mother I had once been, for the boy he could have been, for the entire ugly tragedy of it all. Detective, I said, my voice soft but firm. My son needs help that I cannot give him. He has made his choices. I have to respect that. I don't wish him any further harm, but I cannot be a part of his life anymore. Please do not contact me again regarding him. The detective nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his weary eyes. He saw a mother who had reached her absolute limit. He saw a woman who had nothing left to give. I understand, Ms. Carter. Thank you for coming in. I walked out of the police station and into the clean morning air. The sun was warm on my face. The city hummed with life, with people moving forward, building, loving, living. I stood on the steps for a long moment, just breathing. It was over. Truly, completely over. Mark was dead. Leo was in prison, his mind and spirit broken, facing a future of concrete and steel. Eleanor was dead. Clara was gone. The house was sold. Every thread of that poisonous tapestry had been cut. The weight that had been crushing me since the moment I opened my eyes in this new life was gone. I felt light, empty, but in a clean, promising way. Like a field after a fire, ready for new growth. I had my freedom. I had my vengeance. I had a healthy bank account and a burgeoning new career. My parents were safe and happy, traveling the world. I had one. But as I walked to my car, a strange hollow feeling began to bloom in the space where my hatred had lived. What now? For a decade in one life and 6 months in this one, my entire existence had been defined by them, by my love for them, my service to them, and finally my hatred for them. They had been the sun around which my world revolved, whether in devotion or in destruction. Now that sun had been extinguished. The universe they had inhabited was gone. I was standing in a vast, silent emptiness. I got into my car but didn't start the engine. I just sat there watching the people on the street. A woman laughing with a friend. A man carrying groceries for his family. A couple holding hands. Their lives seemed so simple, so full of mundane, beautiful connection. A connection I had never truly known, not even in the beginning with Mark. Had I ever been loved for who I was and not for what I could provide? Had I ever loved without it being a form of servitude? Questions were unsettling. I had been so focused on surviving, on fighting, on winning that I had never stopped to consider what winning actually looked like. I had achieved everything I set out to do. I had sent their whole family to the crematorium, just as I had sworn. So why did I feel like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking into nothing? I started the car and drove home to my beautiful empty apartment. It was stylish, secure, and silent. I poured myself a glass of water and stood on my balcony, looking out at the city skyline. I had all the trappings of a successful, independent life. But the life itself felt spectral. The rage was gone. Purpose was fulfilled. And in its wake there was just me. Amelia. Whoever that was. I thought about Leo's words, his reborn memory. He remembered the life of privilege and success I had built for him. He remembered it as his right, his destiny, stolen from him by my refusal to play my part. He saw himself as the victim. In his eyes, I was the villain who had divorced his father, abandoned him, and orchestrated their downfall. And in a way, he was right. I had orchestrated it. I had been the author of their ruin. I had chosen to become the monster under the bed, the vengeance they never saw coming. Was that who I was now? A monument to retribution? Was there anything left of me beyond the ashes of my past? A week later, my parents returned from their trip, tanned and full of stories. Their joy was infectious, and for a few days I was able to lose myself in their happiness. They had moved on. They saw my new apartment, my new confidence, and they believed I had moved on too. I didn't disillusion them. I threw myself into my work. My freelance business was growing. I hired a part-time assistant. I was good at this. I was building something that was truly mine, built on my talent and my effort, not on someone else's needs or expectations. But the quiet moments were the hardest. The evenings alone. The weekends with no one to answer to. The silence was a vast, echoing chamber where the ghost of my old self would sometimes appear, asking questions I couldn't answer. One afternoon, I found myself driving past the old neighborhood. I didn't stop. I just slowed down as I passed the house. It looked different. New paint, a different car in the driveway, toys scattered on the lawn. A new family. A new story. There was no trace of the pain and betrayal that had festered within those walls. The world had moved on, effortlessly erasing us. I realized then that my victory was complete, but it was also finite. It existed only in the past. I had been so busy burning down my old life that I had forgotten to lay a foundation for a new one. I had avenged my death. But I hadn't yet figured out how to live. The hollow feeling didn't dissipate. It settled in, a quiet companion in my sleek, silent apartment. I had won a war, but peace felt strangely like a void. My days were structured, productive, and utterly solitary. My freelance design business was thriving, but the success felt like points on a scoreboard in an empty stadium. The applause I had craved, the acknowledgement from Mark and Leo that I had been wronged, that I was worthy, was silence. One was dead, the other imprisoned, and both had died hating me. My parents, bless them, tried to fill the silence. They invited me for dinners, sent me articles about new hobbies, subtly mentioned friends with lovely sons who were finally single. I loved them for it, but their world of bridge games and garden clubs felt like a foreign country I couldn't immigrate to. I had seen the abyss. I had pushed men into it. You don't come back from that and start discussing rose varieties with the same ease. The nightmares began a month after my visit to the police station. Not of falling, but of pushing. I would stand on the balcony, but it was me who had my hands on Leo's chest, my face contorted with the same hatred he had shown me. I would wake up gasping, the phantom feel of his shirt in my fists, my heart hammering against my ribs. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Evans, called it projection of guilt and moral injury. I called it the cost of doing business, but the currency was pieces of my soul. I needed a change of scenery, something more profound than a new paint color in my apartment. On a whim, I bought a ticket to Italy. A solo trip. No itinerary, no tour groups. Just me, a rental car, and a vague notion of driving through Tuscany. First few days were disorienting. The beauty of the rolling hills, the ancient stone villages, the vibrant fields of sunflowers, it all felt like a postcard I was failing to properly appreciate. I was a ghost moving through a world of vibrant color. I'd sit in a piazza with a cappuccino, watching families and lovers, and feel like an anthropologist studying an alien species of happiness. One afternoon, lost on a dirt road between vineyards, my rental car sputtered and died. I was miles from the nearest village, with a dead phone and a sinking sun. Panic, my old familiar friend, began to creep in. But then, a strange calm descended. This was a practical problem. Carburetor or a battery. It was not a betrayal. It was not a plot. It was just a broken machine. An old man on a tractor eventually rumbled by. He didn't speak English, I didn't speak Italian, but through gestures and a shared frustration with faulty machinery, he managed to tow me to his family's agriturismo. It was a sprawling, centuries-old farmhouse, its stone walls warmed by the setting sun. His daughter, Sophia, who spoke broken English, welcomed me in, insisting I stay for dinner. That evening, seated at a long wooden table laden with food from their farm, bruschetta with tomatoes that tasted like sunshine, pasta rolled by hand, wine from their own grapes, I felt a crack in the ice around my heart. There was no pretense here. No hidden agendas. Just a family sharing their food and their home with a stranded stranger. They asked me no probing questions. They simply included me in their laughter, their arguments about soccer, their simple, profound gratitude for the harvest. I ended up staying for a week. I helped Sophia in the kitchen, learning to make pasta. I followed her father through the vineyards, my city shoes covered in rich, dark soil. I didn't do much. I just was. And for the first time since my rebirth, the constant humming engine of my mind, the one that was always calculating, planning, defending, quieted down. On my last night, Sophia and I sat on the terrace, looking at the stars, clearer than I had ever seen them. "You have sad eyes," she said simply, not unkindly. "Like you have carried a very heavy thing for a very long time." I looked at her, this woman who lived a life of tangible, earthy truth, and found I wanted to tell her. Not the whole sordid story, but the essence of it. "I was in a battle," I said, my voice quiet in the vast, starry night. "I won. But the battlefield is empty." She nodded, sipping her wine. "The earth, after a fire, looks dead. But it is not. It is resting. And the ashes make the soil rich for what comes next. You cannot plant a new vineyard on the same day you burn the old one. You must wait. You must let the soil remember how to be soil." Her words sank into me, deeper than any therapy session had. I had been trying to build a new life on the still smoldering ashes of the old. I hadn't allowed myself to grieve. Not for Mark, not for Leo, but for the woman I had been, the hopeful bride, the devoted mother. That woman was also a casualty, and she deserved a moment of silence. When I returned home, the city felt different. Less like a cage, more like a canvas. The hollow feeling was still there, but it no longer felt like an emptiness. Felt like space. Potential. I started making small, deliberate choices for no other reason than that they brought me a flicker of joy. I bought a ridiculously expensive cashmere blanket simply because I liked the feel of it. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always been curious about but had never had the time for. My first attempts were lopsided, clumsy disasters, but the feel of the cool, wet clay in my hands was grounding. It was creation, not destruction. I also began the painful, necessary process of grieving. I allowed myself to cry, not for the monsters they became, but for the love I had genuinely felt. For the family picnics, for the sound of Leo's laughter as a child, for the man Mark had pretended to be in the beginning. I mourned the future that had been stolen from all of us, the future where things might have been different. I lit a candle for the Amelia who died on that rooftop, and I forgave her for her naivety, for her desperate need to be loved. One day I was cleaning out a storage box and found my old portfolio from before I was married. The sketches were bold, colorful, full of a youthful, untamed energy. I had forgotten that woman, the artist. I had buried her under a mountain of laundry and grocery lists and tuition fees. I took the portfolio to my studio, a real room in my apartment I had dedicated to my work, and pinned the old sketches to the wall. They were a message from my past self, a reminder of who I was before I became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's victim, someone's avenger. A new idea for a project began to form, tentative at first, then with growing conviction. It would be a series of digital paintings. Metamorphosis. It would chart the journey of a phoenix, but not just its rebirth from the flames. It would show the painful, messy, necessary period in the ashes, the slow reknitting of spirit and will, the first tentative unfurling of new wings. It would be my story abstracted into art. Not for an audience, not for a client, but for me. As I worked, sketching the first outlines of a creature half emerged from a dark, ashy landscape, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. A sense of purpose that was entirely my own. It wasn't fueled by rage or fear. It was fueled by a quiet, stubborn curiosity about who I could become. The world had not magically filled with friends or lovers. The silence in my apartment was still there. But it was no longer a threatening silence. It was a fertile one. I was, at long last, letting the soil remember how to be soil. I was waiting. And for the first time, the waiting felt like a beginning, not an end. 5 years later, the gallery opening was a whirl of soft light, murmured conversations, and the clinking of wine glasses. My series, Metamorphosis, spanned 3 walls, a journey from dark, chaotic abstracts of ash and shadow to the final, breathtaking piece, a phoenix in full flight, its wings not of fire but of intricate, stained glass, refracting a light that seemed to come from within the canvas itself. I stood to the side, observing the crowd. My parents were there, beaming with a pride so pure it made my throat tight. Sophia had flown in from Italy, her robust laughter a familiar, comforting sound in the sophisticated hum. There were colleagues from the design world, clients, even a few critics. But my eyes kept drifting to the paintings themselves. They were no longer just my story. They had taken on a life of their own, speaking to others of their own losses, their own resurrections. A man was standing in front of the central piece, the one titled The Ashes and the Seed. Depicted that moment of hollow victory, the vast, silent emptiness after the fire. He was studying it with an intensity that felt personal. He wasn't just looking, he was reading it. He was tall, with a quiet presence, dressed in a simple, well-cut jacket that spoke of confidence without arrogance. When he finally turned, his gaze found mine across the room. His eyes were a calm, direct gray, and they held a depth of understanding that made my breath catch. He didn't smile, but he gave a small, acknowledging nod as if to say, "I see it. I see you." My assistant, a bright young woman named Chloe, appeared at my elbow. "Amelia, there's a gentleman from the Chicago Arts Review who'd like a word." And the curator is absolutely thrilled with the turnout. I let myself be swept into the professional motions, giving interviews, accepting congratulations. But a part of my awareness remained tethered to the man with the gray eyes. I saw him move through the exhibit, spending a long time with each piece. He didn't rush. He absorbed. It was near the end of the evening, as the crowd began to thin, that he approached me. My parents had just left, and Sophia was deep in conversation with a wine enthusiast about Tuscan varietals. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. "Thank you for this. It's remarkable." "Thank you for coming," I replied, the standard response. But then I added, genuinely curious, "You seemed particularly taken with the ashes and the seed." He looked back toward the painting. "It's the most honest one," he said. "Everyone talks about the triumph of the phoenix, the glory of the rebirth. No one talks about the silence afterward, the disorientation, the question of what now when the thing that defined you is gone." He turned his gaze back to me. "That's the real work, isn't it? Not the burning, but the building from nothing." His words landed with the precision of a master key, unlocking a chamber in my heart I kept sealed. He saw it. Not the vengeance, not the drama, but the quiet, grueling aftermath. We talked. His name was David Thorne. He was an architect, recently returned from a decade of working on sustainable housing projects in Southeast Asia. He spoke of the challenges there not with heroism, but with a grounded practicality that I found refreshing. He, too, was in a period of rebuilding, of figuring out his place back in a country that had moved on without him. We didn't exchange life stories that night. We didn't need to. There was a mutual recognition of two people who had navigated their own versions of the abyss and had come out the other side, quieter, wiser, and wary of easy answers. He asked if he could take me for coffee sometime to continue the conversation. I said yes. That coffee led to dinners, which led to long walks through the city. It was slow, deliberate. There was no frantic rush of passion, but a steady, growing warmth, like the sun slowly heating the earth at the dawn of a new season. He was the first man I didn't feel the need to perform for, to mother, or to defend myself against. With David, I could just be Amelia, the woman who loved strong coffee, terrible 80s music, and the quiet satisfaction of a line perfectly drawn. He never flinched from my past. I told him one evening a few months in, the edited version. A bad marriage, a painful divorce, a son who was lost to me. I didn't mention the murder, the rebirth, the intricate web of my revenge. That was a darkness I would likely always carry alone. But he heard the pain beneath the summary, and he simply took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said. And it was enough. A year later, I was standing in the kitchen of the home we now shared, a light-filled loft with a terrace overlooking the city. I was sketching, a new series beginning to form in my mind, this one about roots and wings. David was at the counter, attempting to make pasta from scratch, a gift from Sophia that had resulted in a comical dusting of flour over everything. My phone buzzed. It was an email from a state penitentiary. The subject line was, "Inmate communication request." Leo. I hadn't heard from him in over 4 years. I had legally severed my parental rights after his sentencing. His name was a ghost from a tomb I had long since sealed. My hand trembled slightly. David noticed the shift in me immediately. He wiped his hands and came to stand beside me, his presence a silent anchor. "You don't have to read it," he said softly. I knew I didn't. I could delete it, block the sender, and continue with my beautiful, peaceful life. But a part of me, the part that had finally made peace with all the ghosts, needed to know. I opened it. It wasn't from Leo directly, but from a prison chaplain. Leo, it seemed, had been participating in a restorative justice program. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or for me to visit. The message was a simple, stark relay from the chaplain. He said to tell you he understands now. He said to tell you he's sorry. 3 sentences. They cost me nothing to read, and they gave me nothing I needed. The apology was for him, a part of his own process. It didn't change the past. It didn't heal the wounds. But it was an acknowledgement, a final period at the end of a horrific sentence. I showed the email to David. He read it and then pulled me into a firm, steady embrace. "It's over," he whispered into my hair. And it was. Truly, finally over. I closed the email and deleted it. I looked out at our terrace, where the first brave shoots of the herb garden we were planting were pushing through the rich, dark soil. David had built the planter boxes himself. I thought of the phoenix in my painting, of the long, silent time in the ashes. I thought of Sophia's words about the soil. I had waited. I had let the ground rest. And now, without fanfare or drama, new life was growing. Not to replace what was lost, but to exist alongside it, a testament to the resilience of the earth, of the spirit. I turned to David, flour still dusting his eyebrow, and I laughed, a real, free, joyful sound. "Your pasta is going to be a disaster." He grinned, that warm, easy grin that still made my heart flip. "Probably. But we can always order pizza." He went back to his kneading, and I went back to my sketching. The sun streamed in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The city hummed its endless song below. Past was a closed book on a distant shelf. The future was a blank page, a clean canvas, a patch of dark, fertile soil waiting for whatever we chose to plant next. I was no longer the victim, the avenger, or the woman in the ashes. I was simply Amelia. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, that was more than enough. The end.